Ladies and gentlemen, dear IRENA partners, dear MedGem partners, welcome to our webinar, Advancing Standardization and Metrology for Green Hydrogen Development, a focus on certain Mediterranean countries, SMEs. Today, we will see how standardization and metrology are essential for facilitating the integration of green hydrogen into both local and international markets and how they are key enablers for trade. SMEs face particular challenges in developing these frameworks, such as aligning national regulation with international standards or meeting the quality and safety requirements necessary for green hydrogen trade. Through this webinar, we will look at the EU and IRENA's experience and leadership in this area in order to provide valuable lessons and ways forward. This webinar will be divided into 2 sessions, each of them followed by a Q&A session and discussion in which we count on every one of you to participate and really benefit from the presence of our experts. You will be able to raise your questions or reflections through the Q&A box or through the chat. We look forward to all of your inputs. The first session will be on advancing standardization for green hydrogen and its derivatives in SMEs. In the second session, we will look at actual actionable pathways for standardization, certifications, and metrology in certain Mediterranean countries. So, with no further ado, I'd like to launch this webinar with our representative and opening speakers. Let us start with IRENA's Head of Innovation and End-Use Application Team, Mr. Francisco Boschel. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Tiziana de Harles. And on behalf of IRENA, I would like to welcome all of you, all the participants to this webinar on green hydrogen standardization and metrology. So we are coming back just a few days ago from the COP29 in Baku. And despite how we assess the outcome of this COP, IRENA continues to highlight that renewables is a key cornerstone to achieve a sustainable energy future. Actually, in our recent World Energy Transitions Outlook analysis, we found that in 2023, the renewable power capacity grew almost 500 gigawatts, which is, again, a record year. However, to meet a 1.5 Paris Agreement line scenario, we need to have additional capacities every year of double that, around 1,000 gigawatts. So we are still a little bit far from achieving that growth that we need. Actually, concerning green hydrogen, again, to be aligned with a 1.5 degree scenario, we should have around 500 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity by 2030. That means that we need around 70 gigawatts of new electrolyzers capacity every year between now and 2030. Those 500 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity in 2030 would require around 1,000 gigawatts of renewable electricity capacity. Just to give a little bit of context, that is basically the same cumulative installed capacity of the United States. So we are saying that by 2030, we should have enough renewable capacity as the whole country of the United States just to produce green hydrogen to keep us aligned and on track with our climate and energy transition objectives. So why is this so important in the context of this webinar? Because we need to assure that all these value chains that are being created and developed to actually meet that supply of green hydrogen meet the expectations in terms of performance, safety, and return of investment from all the stakeholders, investors, public decision makers, policy makers, and of course, citizens and industries. And then we discussed, okay, what are the instruments that we have at hand that can really ensure that those value chains can deliver as it's expected? We can discuss about different financial instruments, insurances, and so on and so forth. But one that is sometimes overlooked and is very strong and very powerful is quality infrastructure. And quality infrastructure comprises technical standards and conformity assessment that includes testing, certification, accreditation, metrology and calibration, and inspection. If we have in place a strong quality infrastructure, which is adopting the best international practices based on international standards, we can certainly mitigate to a great extent all the technical risks across the whole green hydrogen value chain. That's why we have joined forces with the German Metrology Institute, the Ministry of International Cooperation of Germany, ISO, IEC, and many other partners to develop this analysis on a quality infrastructure roadmap for green hydrogen, which was launched at the COP29 in Baku. This roadmap gives clear explanation to our member countries, but all different stakeholders on how this quality infrastructure can be developed and put in place, adopting the best international standards and practices for conformity assessment. I look forward to the forthcoming discussion, also to see how this is relevant in the particular case of South Mediterranean countries. And I also like to take the opportunity here to express our gratitude to the EU's MEDGEM project, the representatives I see here, Mustafa, Raya, and all the other team members for a great cooperation in organizing this important event. Thank you very much, and I give the floor back to you, Tiziana. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco, and thank you for linking to the COP insights. It also shows how the topic important is in these current circumstances. And now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Mustafa Taoumi, Deputy Team Leader of the MEDGEM Network.
Thank you, Tiziana. Thank you, Francisco. Good day, distinguished guests and the colleagues. On behalf of the MEDGEM team, I'm delighted to welcome you to this joint IRENA MEDGEM webinar on advancing standardization and metrology for green hydrogen development in the South Mediterranean countries. As we embark on this transformative journey towards a sustainable energy future, green hydrogen has emerged as a key enabler for decarbonization, enabling both local energy security, but also international trade opportunities. However, unlocking its full potential require robust standardization and metrology to ensure safety, quality, and compatibility across the entire hydrogen value chain. This webinar is an important platform to address these critical challenges, as mentioned by Tiziana, and identify actionable pathways together with IRENA and others stakeholders engage in this journey. We will explore how collaborative efforts can empower Southern Mediterranean countries to align with international standards, foster regional cooperation, and attract, that is, I think, the most important for those countries, the necessary investment for green hydrogen development. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our partner, IRENA, Francisco, David, Arno, and other team members of IRENA and other supporting institutions for their invaluable contribution to making this webinar possible. Your partnership and commitment to advancing the green hydrogen agenda are deeply appreciated. I would like to thank our distinguished speakers and panelists for joining us today and sharing this insight on this very important topic. Your expertise will certainly guide us in shaping the future for green hydrogen in the region. Let us begin this important discussion, and I look forward to the valuable contribution that will emerge from today's discussion. Thank you very much. Over to you, Tiziana.
Thank you very much for these inspiring words. They give a perfect ground to move on to our first session called Advancing Standardization for Green Hydrogen and its Derivative in Southern Mediterranean Countries. It will be moderated by Arno van den Bos, analyst at IRENA. Please, Arno, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tiziana, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for the interest in this important topic. I think all the speakers will reinforce it that it's really important to have good standards and certification for green hydrogen and its derivatives. So the first session has three speakers, and each speaker has 10 minutes to give a short introduction and make some key points to their organization. And then we'll have a Q&A session in which I will ask a few questions, but you're also invited, the public is also invited to participate in asking questions through the chat. So please ask your questions. You can ask them as they pop up in your head, and we'll select, hopefully, most of them to be able to discuss during the Q&A session. So the first speaker is my colleague, Jay Daftafle. He is the Associate Program Officer at IRENA, and he has been leading work on quality infrastructure, not only for hydrogen, but also for other renewables for the last few years. He will be followed by a speech by Mustafa Taoumi that you already listened to from MedGem Network on growing the role of green hydrogen and the importance of standardization. And last but not least of this session, we'll have Dr. Maximilian Kuhn, who is advisor on regulation codes and standards with Hydrogen Europe. So I'll cede the virtual floor to Jay Daftafle to speak on quality infrastructure roadmap.
Thank you, Arno, and a very good morning to all participants, and thank you for your interest in this topic. As mentioned by both Francisco as well as Arno right now, we actually launched a quality infrastructure roadmap at COP29. So the purpose of my presentation is to quickly give you some insights on this roadmap and how it could be beneficial for your own work in this topic. So starting with about IRENA, just in case you're not familiar with the organization very quickly. So we are an intergovernmental organization, and we have about 169 member countries. Our main objective basically is to promote the adoption of all major forms of renewable energy. And currently, I'm based in the IRENA Innovation and Technology Center office in Bonn, and the main responsibility of this office is to identify the innovation trends happening in the renewable energy space, and then providing guidance on how countries and other stakeholders can harness those trends for the driving sustainable energy transition. So the first point I wanted to make is that this roadmap is actually a result of a project that we sort of implemented together with the German Metrology Institute, PTB, between April 2022 and November 2024. So it recently concluded. And the main objective of this project was actually to raise awareness on the importance of quality infrastructure for green hydrogen. So this is sort of the target that we had. And there were two key deliverables from this project. The first deliverable, which I'll be presenting shortly, is the development of a roadmap for green hydrogen with relation to quality infrastructure, and that sort of was intended to provide guidance on what quality infrastructure is and how stakeholders can take advantage of this ecosystem. And the second output actually was to apply this roadmap approach in a particular country in the form of a case study. And with relevance to this webinar, actually the country that we chose was Tunisia. So we actually applied this approach to Tunisia to see its efficacy, and I'll also be presenting some very quick snippets on what we found in this case study. So this is the context in which this roadmap was developed. So just to sort of set the scene, as also mentioned by Francisco in his opening remarks, and also Mustafa, quality infrastructure is a system that is really applicable to the complete value chain of green hydrogen. So in this infographic, you can actually see the value chain of green hydrogen production in the top part of the graphic. So it starts off with generating electricity from renewable sources of energy, which is then used to power a water electrolysis process, and then it is eventually transported via pipelines or other modalities, ships or or other mediums, and then eventually being used in end-use applications where appropriate. So a lot of focus now is given on that, but what we've tried to also raise awareness on is that beyond the physical infrastructure, there's actually a quality infrastructure that has to also to be in place for this energy carrier to be produced safely and in a sustainable manner. And the key pillars of quality infrastructure, which will also be touched upon by my fellow presenters later on in this webinar, as follows. You have standards which provide voluntary guidance on the technical parameters that need to be considered when working on with green hydrogen technologies. You have inspection and testing mechanisms to ensure that those mechanisms are being complied with. You have the pillar of metrology, which looks into the art of measurement and ensuring those measurements are done in the most accurate way possible. You have certification to ensure that claims that are being made of sustainability are valid and true and also conform to international requirements. And you also have accreditation, which basically are institutions to ensure that there are qualified personnel who are available to essentially undertake these responsibilities. So quality infrastructure is not just about focusing on certain pillars, but looking at the system as a whole. And there'll be more insights on this shared in the other presentations as well. So now in our roadmap, we basically identified 5 steps that need to be undertaken to ensure that a robust quality infrastructure ecosystem can be in place. The first step that we propose for any stakeholder looking to develop such an ecosystem is to first undertake an assessment on what role green hydrogen will play in their national economic context as well as energy transition efforts, because this will dictate what infrastructure actually needs to be in place for this energy carrier to be utilized. The second step, once that assessment is done, is to then develop a green hydrogen strategy to ensure that a vision is in place to ensure that all stakeholders can work together to achieve those strategic goals that have been identified in the assessment phase in step 1. Now, what we do recommend in the third step is, in parallel to developing a strategy, it is equally important to also undertake an assessment of what quality infrastructure services are available in the country. So this can be taking a stock of what standards are being complied with in the country, what testing services are available, are metrology laboratories or standards available in the country and beyond. So this is something that we also recommend be done. The fourth step is then identifying what supply and demand in terms of QI requirements need to be, let's say, developed, depending on the assessment results that have taken place in step 3. And then finally, looking at all the steps from steps 1 to 4, it's important then for governments and stakeholders to work together to develop a cohesive action plan to address the barriers that have been identified with regards to quality infrastructure development in that particular national context. So this is sort of the approach that we've developed, and we've also, again, tested it in Tunisia as part of our case study. So looking at analyzing the potential for green hydrogen derivatives, there are many variables that can be considered when looking at this assessment. So looking at the renewable energy potential, undertaking the analysis on the potential applications of green hydrogen, looking at the downstream, midstream, and upstream activities with regards to green hydrogen, and also undertaking a market assessment are some of the key variables that should be undertaken in this first phase when trying to map out what green hydrogen will play in a particular national context. And again, this is a very collaborative effort, so it has to be consulted with all relevant stakeholders who intend to use this energy carrier. The second step then looks about developing a green hydrogen strategy, and actually IRENA together with UNIDO and EDIOS earlier this year actually launched a report and guideline on how to develop a green hydrogen strategy. And we also recently launched a publication in September this year, which also builds upon this analysis, again, to provide more insights on how green hydrogen should be, strategic vision should be developed. And some of the key pillars that need to be considered when looking at strategic visions is having the right ambition and right collaboration mechanisms to ensure the strategy can be implemented in a harmonious way. Looking at the industrialization potential when it comes to the application of green hydrogen as an energy carrier. Undertaking the right sustainability parameters to ensure that this energy carrier is produced in as clean a mechanism as possible. Having the right financing mechanisms to support project development with regards to green hydrogen. Also, mapping out the trade potential with regards to this energy carrier is extremely an important facet to have in the strategic vision. And then one thing that we're trying to promote in this, let's say, report, and also generally speaking, is also please try to consider the inclusion of quality infrastructure elements in the strategic vision for green hydrogen development. And this is often overlooked, and we hope that this publication, as well as events such as this, raise awareness on the importance of this parameter. Now, with regards to Tunisia, just to provide some context, this is a sort of a summary of what Tunisia has in their strategy. And some of the key points that they have is that they want to become an exporting nation for green hydrogen by 2050, to have about 8 million tons exported by that time. And they look at Europe as their main market to sort of trade this green hydrogen that they produce. They have very ambitious goals to ensure that they use renewable power to produce the green hydrogen via water electrolysis. And they already have various mechanisms in place to essentially collaborate with the EU to ensure that this vision is realized. So they already have a strategic vision in place, but when we were analyzing the strategy, we noticed that the entirety of quality infrastructure wasn't covered in the strategy, whereas they mentioned certain standards that needed to be complied. So I think what we have done through this project is also raise awareness that the country also has to look beyond standards and also touch upon other facets of the quality infrastructure ecosystem. Now, with regards to the assessment of quality infrastructure services in the country, there are many parameters that can be considered, but what we do recommend in this step is to look at certain variables such as the legal and institutional framework, the administration and infrastructure availabilities, looking at the service delivery and technical competencies of QI organizations in the country, and also potentially collaborating with other partners in the region or internationally to fill in gaps that may be there. And what we are sort of recommending in terms of how this assessment can be done is to actually leverage a tool that has been developed by PTB and the World Bank. And they have a rapid diagnostic toolkit which can actually provide a very cohesive way to undertake this assessment. So within the roadmap publication, we've provided a sort of a link to this toolkit and obviously open access for any interested stakeholders to utilize it to make this assessment. Now, we again leverage this toolkit in the case of Tunisia, and I've just taken the example of standards over here. So what we did find in Tunisia is that there is an institution called INORPI, which is the national standardization body in Tunisia. And leveraging the toolkit and also engaging with stakeholders in the country, as well as our colleagues in PTB, we did find in summary that Tunisia has a very good ecosystem when it comes to standardization, and they are participating very actively in the international system when it comes to this topic. So our let's say assessment found that in terms of standards, they're very robust and they're on track. But there are still some areas of improvement with regards to where they can sort of enhance the value of standards for green hydrogen in the country. And there were two main areas that we identified. The first one was for them to participate in particular technical committees for green hydrogen that international organizations such as ISO and IEC have. And then the second one was to also work on developing the training curriculum for personnel to ensure that they can undertake these responsibilities and ensure the standards are conformed with as their green hydrogen sector develops. So this is sort of how we leverage the toolkit in Tunisia for standards, but we've also done this for the other QI pillars, as I mentioned before. Now, what's unique about this roadmap, and this is sort of the fourth step of our roadmap, is that we've also developed a kind of checklist which provides guidance on what services need to be in place before you actually go into, let's say, green hydrogen specific related QI instruments. So we developed a 3-tier system. So at the first level, what we are sort of recommending is that countries focus on ensuring that their quality infrastructure ecosystem, generally speaking, is ready and is well matured, and also looking into having relevant QI services for the renewable energy sector, potentially also gas infrastructure, because that is where that some countries are looking to use that infrastructure to transport hydrogen if that's what their priorities are. So this is something that we're sort of recommending that countries do first. In the second step, then we then are sort of pointing out what services need to be available for hydrogen, generally speaking. So again, looking at more medium and advanced services with regards to hydrogen. And then at the third level, we then try to then provide guidance on what services need to be there specifically for green hydrogen. So this is sort of how we're trying to provide guidance to governments and stakeholders on how a quality infrastructure ecosystem can be developed. So this is an example of a checklist that we developed for standardization in the case of Tunisia. So as you can see in the presentation, at level 1, we've identified certain key standards that have to be in place for Tunisia to follow. We've also recommended certain technical committees that Tunisia should be a part of to ensure that they are on track to ensure that their standards are compliant with the international developments happening in this space. In level 2, there are again certain standards that we've identified which fall within this category. And then we've also recommended certain committees that are now specific to hydrogen that Tunisia should be a part of. And then finally, in level 3, again, we've identified certain standards that are relevant for Tunisia, specific for green hydrogen. And then we've also recommended that they join certain conformity assessment systems that can ensure accuracy and compliance with the international requirements. So we have done this for actually all the pillars in Tunisia. So this is an example of how we've tried to apply this roadmap approach and checklist to a national context. And finally, once those assessments are done, you have an action plan which sort of provides advice on how the gaps can be addressed. And this, as I mentioned, is a consultative process that should be led by governments to ensure that all stakeholder views are represented and considered when developing the actions to address the challenges. And again, this is just an example of an action plan that we developed for Tunisia as part of our case study, where basically we recommended that they really actively pursue engagement with certain technical committees for standardization in hydrogen, and then also working with international partners to essentially develop their training curriculum to ensure services are available. And actually, just to conclude this point, PTB in Tunisia actually have a bilateral project on quality infrastructure development that had just started implementation in October this year. So these action plans that we've developed in this project are going to be used by that project and investigate further to ensure that they're implemented in due course. So finally, my last slide, and thank you for bearing with me. I just wanted to explain the relation between the deliverables of this project. So we have a roadmap publication that provides the guidance on how a quality infrastructure ecosystem for this energy carrier can be developed, and that's sort of the first document to look at. And then there are 2 appendices that sort of demonstrate the let's say linkages and applications that have been referred to in the roadmap. The first is a Tunisia case study, which is in the form of a slide deck, which sort of demonstrates how this roadmap has been applied to Tunisia. And then the second one actually is a database that we've compiled with various standards various standards and technical regulations that are important for green hydrogen. We've leveraged our own desk research in this process, but then we've also leveraged the information database that there was a DIN project on a German standardization roadmap that was also launched in September this year. So we've also looked at those databases and tried to merge our findings. And then we've applied the classification level of level 1, 2, and 3 in this database so people can get more information on what standards are relevant at each level of the process. So with that, thank you for your attention, and I look forward to any questions or clarifications that may arise. So I hand the floor back to Arno. Thank you.
Thanks, Jaydev. Very useful information, and as mentioned, you can find a lot more detail on our website, irena.org. I'll now give the floor again to Mustafa Taoumi from MEDGEM Network to speak on the growing role of green hydrogen and the importance of standardization in the Southern Mediterranean energy transition. Mustafa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Arno. I will try in this presentation to highlight some challenges regarding the current situation in the South Mediterranean countries, and I will develop some ideas, some recommendations to enhance the capacity of those countries, and also to move forward the standards and metrology agenda. So Yes, please, the first slide. Before going forward with the presentation, I would like to just to highlight some definitions, because sometimes we are confusing, standards with metrology, and we don't have a clear idea about the borders between them, but they complement each other. So regarding the standards, they are more focused on the documented agreement or specification, technical specification that establish uniform your requirement about a product, about a good. It's a kind of guidelines that characterize a process or a product or a service, while the metrology is the science of measurements, ensuring the accuracy, precision, and reliability of those measurements. So the standards are there to guide us and to give us what we have to check, what we have to do, how to do it, and what is the quality, but how to measure this quality and measure also this requirement. So we need tools, we need laboratories, and we need also experts and good experts to perform those measurements. Next, please. So regarding the South Mediterranean countries, we know that they have, abundant renewable energy resources. That is a fact, and they are also well positioned strategically, located, in the Mediterranean basin, close to Europe. So Europe is a very promising hydrogen market, and green hydrogen offers also opportunities for those South Mediterranean countries for decarbonization, for hard to abate industry and transport, local economic growth, but also enhance their energy security. But on the other side, they are like a challenge. They are not aligned regarding the standards and metrology with the international standards, and they are a little bit, far away about, those reaching this objective. So that is, I think, the opportunity is to have this, this market in the EU, but also EU is very advanced in this topic of standards and metrology that can take advantage of this proximity to enhance their capabilities in this field. Next, please. So before going, why you are targeting hydrogen, why we are really interested in green hydrogen, and I think the standards are part of any regulatory framework and should be embedded in this regulatory framework and should not be, tackled, in a separate way. That is, I think, from my previous presentation. It was, weeks ago, regarding the policy and regulations, and we highlighted that standards and technical standard and safety are one of the key pillars of this regulatory framework for developing green hydrogen. And next, please. And regarding the standards and metrology regarding the green hydrogen, we have also some key pillars, because standards is a very broad topic, but we have to engage ourselves in some deeply, specifications of those standards, because we have the whole supply chain, which is very complex, as David mentioned in his presentation. We have the production standards, and we have the safety standards, which is involve not only the production, but you have also the handling, you have the storage, and you have also the distribution, etc. And you have the certification, because the stakeholders will need to have, a certainty that is a green hydrogen, that is, the quality required for this hydrogen is accurate. And also, we have the international harmonization that I think it's key, because having our own standards, it will not help us, to move forward with the export. For example, if we have an open market in the EU, we have to align our standards, and that is, I think, as Francisco, also David, mentioned, that it is a necessity to have this harmonization. Otherwise, we will have, other issues that cannot be solved if we are not aligned with those international standards. And we have the infrastructure standards. As I mentioned, it's part of the supply chain. So that is, I think, very important to highlight those key pillars, but you have also the support mechanism that are also key to advance, the standards agenda, the public awareness. You have also the research and development. You have the capacity building, international cooperation, and also how to embed these standards on the policy and regulation framework. Next, please. So the importance of standardization, the core benefits, as we mentioned, it facilitates the international trade, ensures safety and reliability in hydrogen technology, and build also the investor confidence through the consistent quality and benchmark. You have the focus mainly on the certification of origin for green hydrogen, and we have also the compatibility of infrastructure between production, storage, and transport, in the compatibility of materials, because we cannot use any material on those complex supply chain. And we have also to plan for the extension, so we have to be careful on choosing the type of material, but also the other technical specification aligned with international safety and sustainability standard. That's also it's a focus area for a phase for the phased approach that David also mentioned. It is very important to have this alignment with international standards. Next, please. The hydrogen properties, it's very important to know about hydrogen, because we are talking about standards, quality, and we have to go with a very strict safety regulations, because hydrogen is very flammable. That is, I think, one of the properties, the chemical properties, and we have also the diffusibility with a high diffusible rate, and it's make prone to leaks. So it requires the storage and handling protocol, and also the explosion risk. That's wide flammable range necessitates a robust safety systems. Next, please. So this is why hydrogen is unique. It has a unique properties, and chemical, physical, and also some reactivity, have low density and corrosion requirement. So it demand specialized handling and storage and transport protocol, and standards are essential for safety, quality, and compatibility. That was mentioned earlier. So next, please. So for the current status of standardization and metrology in South Mediterranean countries, so most of the countries have developed green hydrogen strategies or roadmap, signaling the recognition of hydrogen key role in energy transition. You have two good examples from Morocco and Egypt who developed some specific regulations, but it's more focused in investment incentives and how to attract developers and investors. The key observation for regarding those two examples, despite this progress, both Morocco and Egypt have not yet fully incorporated standardization framework into their regulatory policy. So the essential regulatory aspects such as metrology, certification, alignment with international remain underdeveloped, and creating gaps in ensuring safety, quality, and interoperability. Next, please. So standardization agencies on those South Mediterranean countries typically fall under the Ministry of Industry or Ministry of Industry and Commerce. And the energy on the other side, the energy strategies and the green hydrogen initiative are led by the ministries of energy or their related, institutions. Those institutions, are often disconnected from industrial and metrology standardization efforts. And this limited coordination between those ministries and entities might lead to misaligned efforts, regulatory fragmentation, and project delay. So that is, I think, very important to highlight as a challenge. Next, please. The gaps integrated industrial standard energy policies, I think it's key. You have sufficient metrology infrastructure. As I mentioned, we need labs, we need tools, we need experts to support the green hydrogen development. And that is, I think, the skill gaps is very limited in institutions, but on the other side, this institution, they are very active in renewable energy, and they have the capacity to reskill those experts and to have them ready soon. The lack of capacity building program, that is, I think, very important, and Javed has mentioned this. So we need also a capacity building programs to address those technical and regulatory expertise needs. Next, please. So the institutional setup, I think we have three main stakeholders. You have the standardization agencies that fall under the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, and we have the energy ministries, and also we have the industry stakeholders. So each of these type of stakeholders have to play its role to develop and implement the national standard for hydrogen. So to ensure the conformity and promote alignment, we have also to coordinate all the infrastructure, the planning of between the production, storage, and transport, and also for export, aligning the hydrogen development policy with environmental and sustainable goal. That is, I think, very important to highlight. And the stakeholders, the industry and stakeholders, have also to play a role in collaborating and setting practical and applicable standards and ensure compliance with established safety and quality frameworks. Next, please. So advancing the standardization moving forward, that was at the national level, but what we can do at the regional level. So that it can be, a kind of platform, because all the countries will face the same, we are facing the same challenges, and they have also to harmonize all those standards and metrology specifications, with international standards. And the international standards, we cannot, change them. So the countries have to, fulfill, all those, requirements and have, those standards aligned with them. So to foster the knowledge sharing, the capacity building, that is, I think, can be a kind of activity that can be, performed, across all countries, and to strengthen the cross-border trade and infrastructure compatibility between Europe and the South Mediterranean countries. So that can be facilitate, the coordination, can support the technical harmonization, and also enable regional stakeholders engagement to address those common challenges, but also take advantage of the opportunities. Next, please. So that, kind of recommendation regarding, those coordination mechanism inside the countries, having established an interministerial committee to align the policies, have, facilitate regular consultation among the agencies and the industry stakeholders to streamline the effort and avoid also the regulatory overlap, to promote the government structure. I think in Germany and other countries, they have some governance structure who managing, the hydrogen standardization and the policy implementation. And you have the example of the customs nomenclature that we faced also when we developed, the standards for renewable energy. For example, without a custom nomenclature, it would be very difficult, to export or to import goods, or including the hydrogen. So the custom nomenclature ensure uniform classification of goods globally, which determine, the tariff or duties. We have the documentation requirements to import and export, and the tariff exemption if we are talking about renewable energy products. In some cases, the countries have, some can reduce the custom studies that is for those kind of green products. Next, please. Yes, I will not repeat the same about strategic recommendation. The regional collaboration is key. We have to develop also those skills for those agencies that are dealing with the standards. It's very important to start now, to upskill or, reskill all those experts, and have also the awareness raising that also to be performed with awareness campaigns for public, but also for decision makers. Next, please. And the conclusion, yes, I will say that for green hydrogen in South Mediterranean countries, it should be, tackled with a very strong collaborative, framework inside and between the countries, and adopt a phased approach, because we cannot go with standards without building, the way, starting with some foundational element like safety standards, certification schemes, and metrology infrastructure, and gradually expand to include the market regulation and the trade frameworks. And we have to also to take advantage of the international partnership to exchange knowledge and best practices and invest in education and outreach. Voilà, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mustafa.
Over to you, Arno. Yeah.
Very interesting points. So we are running a little bit behind, but we also have, in the second hour, one of the speakers fell out. So we do have a bit of leeway in terms of time. So our next speaker for this panel is Dr. Maximilian Kuhn, who is the advisor on regulation, codes and standards at Hydrogen Europe. And Maximilian, I'll let you present your presentation.
Thanks a lot, Arno. I hope you can hear me. Can skip to the next slide, yes, please. So I'm representing Hydrogen Europe here. We are the largest industry association in Europe, focusing the whole value chain for hydrogen. We have more than 600 members. We have international corporations, and I will leave it there, and we can go to the next slide. My slides are structured in two parts. One is more general scene setting part that connects to the last two presentations very nicely. And then I look into the technical nitty-gritty problems that have been also highlighted in the past presentation. And then I go into how we can overcome these challenges and what kind of tools are there available. So standards are in our everyday life. We don't see them, but we feel the impact of them. So just as a scene setter. Next slide, please. But why are we talking about regulation, codes, and standard for the hydrogen scale-up? We need a fast template rollout. We need economics of scale and mass production to bring down the cost. We need product compliance, safety risk, and we want to reduce the liability. And here I have a nice quote from my colleagues from IRENA. So it says, a standardized system would facilitate trade across jurisdictions and prevent market fragmentation. So that's very good. And we can see it with the little trucks here, how that can work in real life. Next slide, please. Not much to say on this slide because Chaydev has already presented it. I just include also the UNIDO scoring on the quality infrastructure. So why are we talking? Germany is leading, or one of the leading countries, with a very high quality infrastructure score. And of course, there is an interest to bring this scoring up for all the other countries to ensure that safety and measurements are done and performed accordingly. Having said this, there are auditors. There's a lack of auditors everywhere. So I'm not personally convinced that we can just train the people and have the auditors and the skills there. Skills are very important, but I think we also have to work with automatization, digitalization. Next slide. But why are we talking about this, and what role standards play. We have seen in the past slide the connection and in where we have which standards and why do we use them. I also used your picture here because I find it very good. Which standards are there for accreditation, certification, testing, inspections, and so on and so forth. But what is the background? I have here the German example, but I think this is applicable to the whole of the EU and probably also worldwide. So first of all, what is security? So it is a product free from danger. And then we have the civil code. It means that anyone who is intentionally or negligibly unlawfully injures the life and the health of others. So that means you are liable if you put something on the market that is not safe, in other words. And then we have different standards like the VDR or the DIN standard, and also the the standards on the general product requirements. And then we have a detailed standard 22734 2024 for hydrogen generators using water electrolysis. So that also includes some aspects on safety. So coming back to that is there is a reverse focus. So you as a company have to prove that your product is safe if something happens. That's why you are using standards which are voluntary. So you're not obliged to use these standards, but if something happens, people will ask questions and they will ask you according to which standards have you performed the test. And that's why you should better prove that then you use the right standards to bring your product safely into the market. So just to give a perspective here, and also the European Hydrogen Bank for funding new hydrogen projects is citing the 22734 standard for hydrogen electrolyzers. So you have to comply with these safety standards to be eligible to also receive the funding there. Next slide. Standards are essential. I think we can skip this. This is German and then European perspective. So we go to the next slide. I will just present shortly what the German standardization roadmap for hydrogen technologies, where I'm in the steering committee as well, has developed, because I think it's important for this crowd also to hear. So there's a standards database for hydrogen technologies. There's an overview of recommendations for actions for pre-normative research, and there is some implementation projects coming out of that. So if you go in detail, so this came out of the European hydrogen standardization roadmap, and then we can go to the next slide. And we looked into all kinds of standards from production, infrastructure, application, and interdisciplinary topics. And you see that some are very well standardized. They are quite advanced. They have a whole green circle. Then we have other like derivatives, other product methods. We still have a lot to do. They are still red, and others are in orange. So we are okay, but we can do a little bit more there. So that gives a good overview. And if you want to delve into this detail, we can go to the next slide. You can download the report, which is now also available in English. And with this, we go into the second part of my presentation. That is looking, now we have different standards and certification criteria. Certification is something else than standards, but they are interconnected. So there's general criteria and advanced criteria. And each jurisdiction is creating its own. So it's just an example. I think we have a longer list of more than 23 hydrogen certification criteria out there right now. And we go to the next slide. So each jurisdiction has its own criteria and its own way to calculate these things. This is highlighted here by the example of the California low carbon fuel standards versus the European RED and Renewable Energy Directive 2, where we have the same food waste, the same processing, the same fuel at the end, but we have two very different outcomes when it comes to the carbon intensity. One is positive and one is negative. And that has huge implications for the companies performing or producing these, because in the one is negative, so you get credits for that, and in the other one, you still have some emissions associated to that. So that is why we need a harmonization on these standards. We need to use the same standards to calculate so that we come to the same values in the end. We go to the next slide. And there's also a problem with allocation. We use here the chloralkali example, which is producing 3 byproducts: chlorine, hydrogen, and caustic. So you can see that the allocation method for the co-products can be chosen between energy-based, mass-based, market-based, molar-based, enthalpy-based, and benchmarking-based. And you can vary the hydrogen emissions between 7 and 280 grams CO2 equivalent per megajoule of hydrogen. So that's a very wide range. And of course, that has an impact on your product that you sell. So it's important that we know which method have you chosen, why have you chosen that, and why do you come to this result in the end. And with this, we go to the next slide. And there's also a system boundary issues. So where do we start, where do we end, and which certification scheme takes what into account, and which products. So it is also advisable not only look at the carbon footprint, but also at other implications for life, for the water impact, for other impact categories that are classified. So you can see here different certification schemes, labels, and different system boundary conditions. I will not go too much into detail here, but you understand also from the last presentation that there's a question why we need metering and quality infrastructure, because we want to know what kind of hydrogen do we get, what is the purity of the hydrogen, and where can I use that hydrogen, and with which carbon intensity does this come and does impact my products I produce from this hydrogen. So we can go to the next slide. There's European regulation underway or already established since 2019, the European Green Deal, that brings into force the electronic product passport, and it's also part of the eco-design regulation for sustainable products, and it's also indirectly mentioned in the RED III legislation. So why do I want to highlight the digital product passport? Because in our understanding, it's a way, it's already in the legislation, but it's also a way to harmonize. So that is also what was presented in the last presentation, that we need to make sure that standards are being fulfilled, that we ensure which kind of hydrogen we are talking about. And all this information needs to convey to the consumer so that he can know about the product and know the impact it has. Next slide. So while in last year at COP, we have signed the mutual recognition agreement, this year we have the quality infrastructure. The problem with the mutual recognition agreement is that it requires harmonization at national energy policies, which could be challenging in my personal opinion. So there's other ways to harmonize regulatory framework, but don't worry, not all markets are harmonized. So there's markets out there that work quite nicely, even they are fragmented. But so there's different ways. There's international recognized standards. This is one of the standards being developed now, is the ISO TC 1987T on the methodology for calculating the greenhouse gas footprint for hydrogen production, utilization, and transport. That should be ready by autumn next year. So it's now in the final stages. So that ensures that we are talking about the same way to calculate emissions, the same boundary conditions. So that sets really the framework for calculating the carbon footprint. Other ways to harmonize is type 3 declaration or comparability factors. On the comparability factors, such as the digital product passport, I want to present you something in more greater detail. Let me go to the next slide. So how do we see it? We have a physical flow of information and a data flow of information that needs to fulfill some kind of regulatory requirements like CBAM, RFNBO certification, union database. So all kinds of regulatory barriers that are put into place and producers need to fulfill. Next slide. And how does it look in detail? So we have a lower bar here, we have sources, we have smart metering in place, we have all the information that is captured during the production process, the emissions are captured, the electricity consumption is captured. All this information is already digitally and automated available to most of the producers. And then we have different feedstocks, production technologies, and different fuels that come out of these processes. And in this case, we can look at the European regulation and the requirements set in this framework, but that could be also replaced by the American IRA and accompanying legislation or Asian legislation, depending on into which market you want to import or export your product. So all this data should go into this metadata sheet. This means this is all the data you're required to provide to the regulator, and it should be automatically collected and filled into this field. And this goes then to the evaluation process and then to the certification. And then you can choose your certification scheme, mandatory or voluntary. That's depending on your customers or on your personal desires. Next slide, please. So basically what we're trying to present here based on this European legislation is moving from a very complex with dead ends process into a very streamlined process where companies know which data to provide, which data needs to be collected for which legislative or regulatory fulfillment, and then bringing this information streamlined digitally into the market. So next slide. So how could this look like in practice? We tested it with one of our members in Neratech with a ESAF value chain, which is one of the most complex value chains. So just to ensure that that can be also captured in such a digital product passport. And it provides all kinds of information criteria that are needed for audits or for ESG requirements, that is more commercial requirements, but also ensuring the traceability throughout the process and ensure that the carbon footprint is met. Next slide. So with this, I come also to my last slide. Coming back to my colleagues from IRENA, they identified these areas, and you can see these problematic areas in orange and red. And in my opinion, these points can be solved by the digital product passport. And with this, I think we have a solution to these very difficult and challenging areas to enable the trade, but also to enable the quality infrastructure that is needed, so that the information is provided for the customers, but also for the safety of the plant. And so in the end, everybody should have a safe space, and all these projects should work in according to the international standards and criteria set. With this, I go back to you, Arno.
Thank you very much, Maximilian. We are actually over the first hour. I do want to take at least a few minutes to ask a few questions, and also I still invite you to ask your questions in the chat of the webinar. If you have questions on anything that has been said by the speakers or any other questions that are related to the discussion in general, feel free to post them here. And then I can ask them to our panelists now. Or we will have, well, in the next hour, there will be different panelists, so we'll get different answers there. I did want to ask a general question a little bit, I mean, to all of the panelists that are with us now, which is on what are the most important current barriers to establishing a consistent green hydrogen standard in the Southern Mediterranean countries, right? So this is a big question. I think some of you have given us already a few hints, but maybe I'll start with Jadef, the first speaker, and then we'll go around to Mustafa and Maximilian. If you want to.
Thanks again, Arno. And I think, it's a big question. But I think the biggest barrier when it comes to development of standards, especially in the southern Mediterranean countries, is sometimes a lack of awareness on how those standards are beneficial for their let's say industry, because sometimes I think people find this topic very complex, and they aren't fully knowledgeable about the benefits. And I think this is where, you know, projects like ours and the initiatives that MedGem project is doing, and also Hydrogen Europe, they can serve as reference cases on how you can actually, how stakeholders can increase their information in this area, and then essentially start to delve into the topic. And hopefully we've made a compelling case that more and more efforts and resources have to be directed towards this quality infrastructure ecosystem, because these countries have an advantage. They're still at a very early phase with regards to their hydrogen development plans. So I think it's important for these countries to take lessons from countries that have already maybe are a bit ahead in the journey, and see what, you know, mistakes or let's say errors they made, and then learn from them and try not to make them in their own national development context. But I'll just keep it short and sweet, and I'll probably invite my other panelists to also share their perspectives.
Thanks, Jadef. Mustafa?
Yeah, thank you, Arno, for this very interesting question. No, in comparison with the EU, there is no comparison. You know, we cannot compare, you know, the South Mediterranean countries with Europe, and that is, I think, a big mistake that we are always, you know, having in our mind that we can go faster, we can go, you know, and we can harmonize, we can do a lot of things like Europe is doing. Unfortunately, the South Mediterranean country, they are at the early stage of defining, you know, the objective of green hydrogen production, and that is, I think, the step that, for example, Morocco and Egypt, they have already, you know, go forward with those, you know, kind of regulations, and that is, I think, the main barrier is those regulations, because the regulations are basically, you know, the priority number one is not the standards. Standards will go, you know, in parallel with the regulation, but it will be, you know, maybe another stage. So that is, I think, when the market will become, you know, more mature, and we'll have, you know, all those MOUs, signed MOUs, you know, practically, you know, transform them in the real projects, that the necessity of standards will come. And I think all the decision makers on those in our countries, they are aware about the importance of standards, but now it's how to deal with. That is, I think, the question that always we ask ourselves, you know, how we have to start. We start with raising awareness, or we have to start with building the capacities, and we have to be careful on when and where we have to do those, you know, start with those, you know, activities. Going with the capacity building, going with the, you know, the upskilling, without any clarity on how to deal with the standards will be, you know, a waste of time and waste of money. And maybe we will build capacity today, but maybe the standards will come in 3-4 years. Maybe those people will be away, and then we'll lose them, because that is, I think, we have to. As David, you know, mentioned, and it is very important to have this standards roadmap clearly, and have to identify, you know, the key barriers starting with the skills, starting with the infrastructure, all those labs, having, you know, a kind of, you know, a holistic, you know, assessment, not only on the specific, but having, you know, this holistic framework that is, I think, very important to have of them all before deciding, you know, how to deal with those challenges.
Thanks very much, Mustafa. Very complete, very comprehensive answer. And I'll leave so opportunity to Maximilian to give an answer.
Yes, thanks. So it's a twofold answer. So one is the regulation. If you look at European regulation, we see that for GOs, guarantees of origin, countries need to have a GO scheme. Most of the countries don't have a GO scheme. If they would have one, they would need to align it. It needs to be approved by the Commission, or there needs to be a mutual recognition agreement with the European Commission, but there is not. Then the same is if you produce derivatives like methanol, then you need to have an effective emission, effective carbon market. That's the wording of the legislation. So whatever that means. But most of the regions don't have an effective carbon market. That means you have problems with the carbon bringing into the derivative. That creates a legislative barrier. On the standard side, or on the quality infrastructure side, I think it took centuries to come to this very high level because it's skills, it's technology, it's metering equipment. So all of that needs to be brought to these regions. I'm not saying they are not capable of that, but also in some areas, like in Africa, we saw that they leapfrogged some technologies and went directly into the mobile phone. So I think also here we should see some leapfrogging, and we should directly go into digitalization of products and metering. So that should help also bring in the more advanced technologies into these regions and help to have a good quality infrastructure.
Great. Okay. For the sake of time, there's a bunch of questions I wanted to ask on cooperation, but I think we saw many examples actually given. I mean, Jadef gave an example of a cooperation between ourselves and Tunisia. Mustafa gave a few examples. We had one question here in the Q&A from the meeting, which is, in which route are international standards adopted into national standards in different countries? So I know that this could be quite complex. So maybe if someone would want to give maybe a short answer to this one, and then I'll go on to the next panel, because people also have need some time for their presentations. So in which route? I would probably interpret, maybe make the question easier in saying how international standards are adopted or referred to in national regulations, right? I think. But they could be that. I guess that's a different, maybe.
I can just quickly say something. So usually, an international standard is then becoming a European standard with an annex document, as then becoming, or in my case, a German standard with an annex document. So it is tailored to the specific country needs and requirements, but is the same basis. So it ensures that it has the same logic, the same thinking, the same language, and the same system boundaries for this. And I think that is important. As far as my knowledge goes, like local legislation in Germany or European can only quote then a German standard or a European standard. They could not quote an ISO standard, and that's why always this is done in parallel. But there's this agreement that if an ISO standard is developed, then it can automatically become a European standard.
Wonderful. I think that's a good answer. If anyone has any urgent,
Arno, yes. Just make is just to compliment Maximilian. Is to sort of just encourage that there's a strong correlation between international standards and national standards, as Maximilian demonstrated. So I think one recommendation that we have in our roadmap is for the national standardization bodies to actually participate in the international technical committees to sort of gain perspectives on what, let's say, international experts are discussing with regards to standardization, and then accordingly, the national standardization bodies can then tailor those discussions to the specific national context, and then that can be reflected in regulation or technical regulations. So I just wanted to sort of recommend that please participate in the international system because it is functioning well and it's accessible to all countries. So yeah, thanks.
Wonderful. Mustafa, did you want to add anything? Don't have to.
Yes, no, quickly, because as for the ISO, the membership, it's I think it's more than 160 countries. So in principle, the international standards are, driven by the countries, perspectives. That is, I think, and the meetings, on the technical meetings, there are a lot of working groups, technical working groups, etc. They should, reach a consensus on those standards. So I think there is, a two ways the direction. The communication. It's the requests come from the countries, and the international standards have to, check if those standards can be, aligned with others, etc., and have, a consensus on this. And then this vice versa. That can be, from the secretariat, can be, a recommendation to the countries, and it is, a two-way dialogue. So there is no limitation on this, interaction. And international and country it's both. We cannot separate them. But in some countries that they are a little bit, delay, or some they have a need, so they can also take advantage of having those international standards, so they can apply them or adapt them to the country local circumstances.
Absolutely. Good points. I'll add to that particularly when it comes to ISO 19870, which is about measuring the carbon intensity, that technical committee from ISO only has 65 member countries. So we always encourage countries that do not participate to participate in these technical committees so that their interests can be represented, right? If you're not at the table, it's going to be really hard to later have an influence on how these standards get adopted.
Exercise. It's a good learning also for skills. I just send somebody there. The only problem is the cost for the travel, but you learn a lot.
Absolutely. And I will close this. We had a comment also from Felix on the interest in the digital passport that Maximilian mentioned, and that it highlights the need for a sound and demand-oriented quality infrastructure system and services. So very good comments. Thanks everyone for the questions. And without further ado, I know we're running a bit late already, but I will thank the panelists, Mustafa Taoumi, Maximilian Kuhn, and Jaidev Taflev for your excellent contributions. And I will yield back to Tiziana for introducing the next session.
Thank you so much, Arno, and thank you indeed, the panelists, for the very nice interventions. Lots of learnings already. I would like to please ask the audience to keep their seatbelt fastened, because there is more learnings to come in the session too. We will look at actionable pathways for standardization, certification, and metrology in certain Mediterranean countries. It will be moderated by Dr. Mustafa Taoumi. So please, Mustafa, the floor is yours, and you have any questions, please ask them in the Q&A so that the experts can keep on answering them. Mustafa.
Thank you, Tiziana, for your kind introduction. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to session 2 of today's webinar, where we'll be discussing actionable pathways for standardization and metrology in South Mediterranean countries. This session focuses on the practical steps the SMEs countries can take to establish a robust framework for green hydrogen standard and metrology practices. Our esteemed speakers, we have 2 esteemed speakers in this session, will provide valuable insight into the regulatory, technical, and certification requirement essential for creating a supportive environment for green hydrogen trade. We will also delve into the critical role of metrology as the backbone of standardization. Metrology ensures, as I mentioned in my presentation, accurate measurement quality control, and alignment with international benchmark. So strengthening the systems and aligning with global standards will enable the South Mediterranean countries to enhance investor confidence, foster cross-border trade, and support the transition to a green-based economy. I encourage all of you to engage actively during the Q&A session, which will follow the discussion and the presentations. As we work together to identify actionable strategy and address the key challenges, so your insight will be very valuable. Without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Arno van den Bos, so it's analyst at IRENA. He will share his insight on green hydrogen and derivatives, regulation, standardization, and certification. So Arno, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Floor is mine again. Thanks, Mustafa, and hello again indeed. So my presentation focuses a little bit on, focus on the sustainability aspects and how standards and certification have an impact on these. I think many of the points were already made by Maximilian, so that's good because it means we are seeing the same issues around this. And I have essentially a short presentation in three parts. If we go to the next slide, the first one is really to show that we talk a lot about hydrogen. However, we expect most of the trade, international trade of hydrogen, to happen in the form of derivatives. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes. So most of the hydrogen that will be used in the future will be produced really close to where it is needed. However, we expect about a quarter of the hydrogen to be traded internationally. And of that share, about half will be moving through pipelines, and 55% here, and the rest, which is very significant still, will be likely moved in the form of derivatives such as ammonia, which is shown in this map with blue arrows. The green is the pipelines, hydrogen through pipelines, and we're also working on an update where we also model both liquid organic hydrogen carriers and methanol as hydrogen carriers, right? And so certifying safety and sustainability of hydrogen is one thing that we have discussed in detail, and there are some additional considerations when we talk about these derivatives that are also important to understand, since, as I mentioned here, a lot of these flows will happen in this form. If we go to the next part, so that's a little bit the context. And then, as Maximilian alluded to, I would say that there are two categories of challenges that we have to deal with. The first one has to do with what are the criteria and what do we consider to be sustainable, right? So in general, it is the jurisdictions that create markets for hydrogen. And we've talked a lot about the EU, but this also happens in other countries, in particular in Asia. We see Japan, Korea, and also the United States, and even some jurisdictions in California. They say we provide stimulants, we create markets for green hydrogen and or derivatives. And so therefore they say what they understand for it to be sustainable and what the criteria are. And the main one here, or perhaps the one we will discuss in most depth, is indeed the carbon intensity. And what we see here is first obvious observation here is that these jurisdictions do have relatively well defined what they consider to be green or low emission hydrogen. However, it's also obvious that most jurisdictions have not really addressed or are in the process of addressing what they understand to be sustainable ammonia or what they understand to be sustainable methanol. And the other derivative is iron and steel, right? Direct reduced iron. So that's the first observation. The other is that the carbon intensity threshold is different per jurisdiction. So this indeed brings a bit of a risk of there being a fragmented market, which means that one particular producer may be able to sell to one market, but not to another. So that's really regarding the sustainability criteria and requirements. And the other aspect, the other category, has to do with how we measure it, right? And how do we measure and how do we demonstrate compliance with these criteria, which is really the second aspect I want to discuss. And Maximilian has also gave us some examples. So if we go to the next slide. And so here we have a typical supply chain. with different steps. And so if you're the owner of an electrolyzer, then your emissions that happen from site are basically scope 1, and scope 2 have to do with the electricity that you buy. But there could also be upstream emissions that happen from perhaps pumping or treating your water. I only showing here example from green hydrogen, but if we were looking at blue hydrogen, there are some issues linked to whether we measure leakage from possible methane or CO2 that is captured when making blue hydrogen, which is never 100%, so there's always some CO2 leaking there. And so the questions there are, which greenhouse gases, first of all, do we measure? Is it just CO2, or do we measure other greenhouse gases? Do we measure emissions of hydrogen itself? Of course, we don't want to because it's a valuable product, but it's also, unfortunately, an indirect greenhouse gas, which means that hydrogen itself does not cause global warming. However, it has impact in the stratosphere on the life cycle of methane, which is, and it actually extends the existence of methane in the atmosphere. So these are complex scientific issues, and so in these scientific committees of these standard setting organizations, it's important to agree on what needs to be measured and how. And the other parts, Maximilian already showed. If we go to the next, if we advance in this slide, so we have water treatment. I will skip this one. And then if we go forward, we have how electricity is sourced, which is very important and also brings a lot of challenges, in particular for developing countries, because the way we certify renewability of electricity in Europe is not always easy applied in other countries, right? So we have the sources of electricity, which have to be demonstrated to be additional, which often come with requirements on time matching and geographic correlation. And then last, we have basically the scope that Maximilian also mentioned. And so some standards cover what we call from cradle to gate, the gate being the producer, but some include the gate of the end user. And so there's a step of transport and distribution and maybe storage that could also generate emissions. And so we have to agree on whether we measure those or not. If we go to the next slide. So I try to, so we have standards. I think they've been introduced very well. So there's the methods for measuring, in this case, greenhouse gas emissions, but also quality and safety. And certification systems are usually NGOs, organizations that define a process, a formal process that involves accredited third-party bodies and that ensures that the whole system and the end products adhere to the certification, to the sustainability criteria that we have discussed. If we go next. And so there is a number of differences, and I will not go in all of them. I already mentioned the difference that different methodologies have in terms of the scope of the supply chain that they cover. And I did refer here to the ISO technical standard 1987-023, which does hope to align and hopefully these measures will be adopted by the different certification schemes in order to use at least the same measuring stick, right? Is like at least if we have one same supply chain, different certification schemes should come out with the same carbon intensity at the end, which is not the case today, unfortunately. And then there's some other issues. Maximilian referred to CapEx emissions. I think it's important to talk about leaks. And then there's another important point, which is what data can be used. So primary data are data that come from the exact installation, so you need to measure those. Secondary data allow the use of averages from the sector, and so it makes reporting a lot easier, but it also takes away the incentive for producers to be cleaner, right? Because they can just use standard data, which may look, the production look better or worse depending on how it performs in reality. So those are also called default values. And then there's other aspects that are important, which have to do with the level of assurance provided. So these are things that need to be defined in the certification scheme, such as what tracking methodology is used, whether the certificate follows the product through its supply chain, or whether it's emitted at the origin and then travels independently to an end user, which is what we call book and claim. And last, there are some requirements on what the certification body needs to comply with. So these are set usually by accreditation organizations that basically, I refer to it as certifying the certifier, right? So not anyone can certify compliance with these. So I'll try to move to some conclusions quickly. So in this report we released 2 months ago, we discussed what has happened in the field of hydrogen, but also what happened in the next slide, Jada, please. So we have also covered what's happening in the field of ammonia, iron and steel, and methanol. So we will not go through the list here, but if you go to the next slide, I just want to highlight a few additional considerations that are important that you wouldn't have for just hydrogen, apart from the boundary and pollutants covered. There's also an important point, for example, for methanol, which is how do we certify that the carbon that's being used for making methanol, right? Methanol is a carbon-containing molecule, that this actually sustainably sourced, right? So today, many producers use it from point sources. However, many of those sources use fossil CO2, and so that would not really be net zero compliant, right? So the net zero compliant projects need to look for renewable sources of carbon, which are mostly biogenic sources, which are available in high concentrations. And then at the end of the spectrum, if you're willing to pay a lot for it, which is not competitive, you can also extract the carbon from the air through DAC. But it's important that certification schemes show us how to measure this, how to take them into account. And then there is issues of allocation of co-products or of, so it depends on what you're, so Maximilian gave a nice example, right? If you use residues, do we look at what is the business as usual scenario and what happens when we take them into account? And then there's other things that also need to be decided, is whether we give credits for exported additional energy, which can be heat or electricity, and credits for offsets, right? You might pay someone somewhere else to reduce emissions, to carbon removals. Are those allowed in the final footprint of your product? So a lot of aspects that essentially we need to agree upon, at least if within a certain market. And if you go to the next slide, I want to go through some brief conclusions. So I think it's important to see that, first of all, the jurisdictions that create the markets do have a say in what they consider to be sustainable, but the interoperability is really important to make sure that we are comparing apples with apples and that we're using the same measuring stick. And it's also important to consider the impact on exporting countries by setting stringent sustainability criteria. And so one aspect that we're seeing in North Africa is many projects are planning to operate in an island mode, simply because that's the only way they can demonstrate that they comply with additionality criteria that the EU imposes. And so this could have good impacts, but it could also not make use of the flexibility options that an electrolyzer can provide, right? So there's different considerations there that need to be adjusted. And perhaps another example I wanted to give is so certain markets may wish to address local markets first before exporting. And we saw an interesting example from Kenya that's producing green methanol for paints locally using geothermal energy, which is of course green. However, when looking for a sustainable source of carbon, they decided to use essentially fossil carbon that's a byproduct of the geothermal energy production. And so this methanol would not be considered renewable under EU laws, but it is certainly something they can decide to use for the local industry first, kickstart the industry, and then later decide they want to get it certified, perhaps looking for another source of carbon to export to the EU. So I think it's important to really have clarity in national hydrogen strategies of what the aim is of the development of the industry, and act accordingly, right? And of course, we've mentioned the importance of transparency, engagement via international fora, such as the ISO. And there is also a role for agreements to develop common standards for ammonia and methanol, such as the steel principles. The steel standard principles are developed really from a private sector initiative, which is also a good example to look at for these derivatives. I will leave it at this. Thanks for the opportunity, and let's go to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Arno, for your insightful presentation and for highlighting the critical element of regulations and certification schemes for green hydrogen and its derivative. Now I'm delighted to introduce our second speaker, Mr. Fabian Planck, Executive Secretary of the Innovation Cluster for Energy at PTB, Germany. will be presenting on metrology solution for the transition to a green hydrogen economy. So, Mr. Plug, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Yes, in the next couple of minutes, you will get an overview on the more technical side of what is needed for a green hydrogen economy and the corresponding quality infrastructure. Can we go to the next slide, please? And perhaps click once or twice. Yeah, thank you very much. The Physikalisch-Technische Bundesanstalt, where I'm working at, is the National Metrology Institute. And to summarize the tasks of such an institute, we can summarize this in one sentence. We create trust in measurements. That means we do most efforts to provide maximum accuracy, and we stand for the reliability in the measurements to support trade, to support technology development, to support the industry, and of course scientists. We have a little more than 2,000 people around 3 sites, and we consider us as a global player in the world of metrology. And since the 60s of the last century, we are also active in international cooperation. That means we are sharing our knowledge to support smaller and emerging countries to be active part in the international field of quality infrastructure, not only in the energy environment. PTB has also many other tasks, which means we are also a research institute to be really on the cutting edge of what's possible, but we also offer services in the laboratory context, but also consultancy. And we have also a couple of legal tasks because we are a governmental institution, a global national authority. Could you go to the next slide, please? To give you this one exactly on the innovation cluster, to give you an overview on what PTB is actually doing in the field of energy, I would briefly introduce the innovation cluster, which deals with technical topics around the energy generation, distribution, but also storage and transport, actually, which are batteries and hydrogen and other energy carriers. These 5 are, let's say, main focus areas, but we are also active in other areas like heat, gas grids, and other liquid energy sources. Okay, let's come to the hydrogen topic on the next slide. And when talking about hydrogen from the German perspective, we need to mention the National Hydrogen Strategy, which is not quite new, but there's one interesting sentence in there about quality infrastructure and why it's needed. The chief components of this measurement and quality assurance infrastructure, which is needed to build up and network at national and European level, are metrology and physical and chemical safety technology. So it's implemented there. That national metrology institutes and PTB has some tasks here, also along the safety, so technical aspects like explosion protection, for example, to provide knowledge and advice here. And it is clear that standards are needed. That it's further stated here. And of course, this is a very general strategy. And we metrologists thought of, okay, how can be the answer of the metrology people, the metrologists, to support that? And you can see that on the next slide, please. And please click once again to display the QR code, because this is a publication where I am co-author with. this is the hydrogen strategy of PTB. And with this, we aim to really support this national endeavor to ramp up rapidly the hydrogen sector, which in fact is not a national project, but yeah, an international one, because Germany relies on import of this energy carrier and commodity. Well, the hydrogen strategy in a nutshell is on the next page. I will introduce the goals here. It includes quality to establish standards, of course, and ensure the quality and also quantity of the traded energy carrier. Safety is the second one, to generate trust in the society and protect the consumers. The same for billing fairness. We ensure that you pay for what you get. Knowledge transfer is the fourth goal here, passing on the knowledge and creating also technology acceptance. Knowledge transfer, we do that on several ways. There are possibilities with the international cooperation, of course, of PTB, but there's also a second one, which goes over the Ministry of Economy and Climate Action, an institutional partnership where the PTB is providing the knowledge on its expertise to international governments to build up quality infrastructures. We have one exemplary project here with Namibia, because this will be a big player in the future for the exports of hydrogen derivatives. And we support innovations with our approach to do cutting edge research on the methods, how to measure accurately and traceable to the international system of units. One example would be the measurement of efficiency across a value chain, because this is of very big importance for investors and the providers of technology if you want to compare systems. Let me go to the next slide, please. Some more examples of our expertise. We, the metrologists, we think certification of the origin is very good and necessary, but it will be also necessary when it comes to legal questions, how we can prove that actually the origin of an energy carrier is as it is certified. We think of a measurement based on physical evidence, and one of this can be done by isotope analysis, which is in the actual status a subject of research. We don't have a final solution here, but we need to work on that to get there. Another example are calibration services. One of them is leakage detection, traced back to standard leaks. And the next one comes from the legal metrology with a good example, fuel pumps, that the consumer is really paying for what he's get. And one other topic is explosion protection in the field of knowledge transfer, to set up the rules to research on parameters for example, hydrogen applications under non-atmospheric conditions, to ensure that the safety rules can actually be applied. Can we go to the next slide, please? Here are many more examples on what metrology can offer for green hydrogen, and it summarizes also the needs. I don't go here into very much detail. simply summarizing these 5 pillars. This is a modeling of networks for gases, safety technology, and we have to deal with many single measurements and the traceability to the international system of units. This also includes reference data, which can be really used in the application, and this pillar on regulation and conformity assessment, which feeds really this technical know-how into the rules and directives. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? This is my last slide. Last but not least, I would like to mention that VTB created together with other partners, which are mainly from the metrology community, a new network for clean energy. This is under Euramet. You can see that here on the bottom side. Euramet is the European Metrology Association, and Euramet also offers many services in the field of capacity building. This is what I wanted to mention. This new network on clean energy is not exactly barely on hydrogen. It is covering many topics, but it is a good contact point. And if you click once more, there should be this QR code to the website of clean energy, of the clean energy EMN. And yeah, I also wanted to mention that the logos here displayed are the funding members. And since we have created this network, the number of members increased to 16. So yeah, the big players of the European community are there, and are also yeah, available to get contacted by stakeholders and yeah, people who want to learn more on the metrology for clean energy. Okay, this is it from my side. I will give back the microphone to Mustafa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Plug, for your enlightening presentation and for emphasizing the importance of metrology and ensuring quality and safety in the whole hydrogen value chain. We now move. It was, the last presentation on this session. So now we'll move on the discussion and the Q&A segment of this session. This is an opportunity I recall on this. That's for our guests and also the participants that can, highlight the question and the Q&A. Chat box. So that is, I think, very important. And let me kick off the discussion with a couple of questions for our distinguished speaker. For both of you, in your view, what are the most significant barriers in the South Mediterranean countries face in implementing, standardization and also the metrology infrastructure for green hydrogen? So maybe Arnaud, you can start.
Sure. So we discussed in the previous panel also a number of barriers. Perhaps I can cite a few that we saw while working, for example, with Tunisia. I think the first barrier is being aware of what's required, right? Start the work. That's also why we recommend starting the work early and have the QI, the quality infrastructure work, happen in parallel with the hydrogen strategy in general. I think there is usually in most countries enough knowledge about what hydrogen is and how to ensure its safety, but it needs to be expanded into sectors where it's not being used yet, right? So it's different to use hydrogen in, say, a refinery or in a chemical process to actually start transporting it, etc. So there's a need for capacity building in those sectors that are new to hydrogen. And then on the practical aspects of QI and of sustainability, on QI, I remember that for example, most laboratories do have good equipment, but then the equipment also needs to be calibrated, and sometimes calibration requires additional availability of skills, of processes that are not in place. And even one example that said, oh, we have the equipment, but we don't have the gas, the standard gas that's needed for calibrating the equipment, right? So sometimes it's small elements that are missing. And so just mapping out what is there, I think is important to addressing that. In the areas of sustainability, I mentioned the major barrier is actually understanding and translating requirements on sustainability that come from areas such as Europe into local jurisdiction. And so an example is the EU has this idea of having local bidding zones. Now, this makes sense in the context of the EU, where different offers and demands of electricity happen, but it doesn't always translate directly into North African countries, right? So the other aspect to consider there is certifying not only your hydrogen, but also have certification systems in place or guarantees of origin for electricity. And this is useful not just for hydrogen, it's useful for any product that requires demonstration of the use of sustainable electricity. It has usually, it incites into demonstrating compliance with climate targets and so forth. So I think that's another step that can be taken to address those barriers. I'll probably stop there.
Thank you very much, Arno. Very insightful. Yes, Mr. Plug, Fabian, yes.
Yes, I think there are many aspects on barriers that need to be overcome. Let us focus on two of them in the field of infrastructure, of quality infrastructure. In my opinion, it's extremely important to look at the interoperability of infrastructure. That means that regional partners need to work together at the very beginning to ensure this interoperability in their standards, in their infrastructure, and we call something like that smart specialization. So not every partner needs to provide everything, but it needs to really work together. It needs to fit together. And this is one issue. And the second issue or barrier is, there are sometimes the planning of the budget when it comes to the infrastructure will underestimate the efforts which need to be undertaken to implement international standards and to set up or to invest in the metrology infrastructure. Coming to that point, what I wanted to say is to ensure the traceability also at national level, you will not get that for free, and it needs to be budgeted into the overall plan, and that's very important. And this is something where the metrology community needs to be involved at the very beginning as well. This is one of my constraints here, or you can have that as an advice to speak with the metrology community at the very beginning. Also on the international level, I want to emphasize that it's very important to look at the international partnerships with BIPM, for example, to talk with their legal associations, the OIML. This is the international one. This is something where one can learn about the implementation of something like that. I mentioned the capacity building options at the at Euramet, the European roof organization. And I also mentioned the EMN, the Network on Clean Energy, which are a good address to work with. Last but not least, also PTB has many things to offer in the field of the international cooperation. That's something where we from our side try to overcome these barriers.
Thank you very much, Fabian. It's very interesting to hear those recommendations. I think one question for you, Fabian, regarding this metrology infrastructure. Do you think that every country has to build his own infrastructure, his own laboratories, have those tools, calibration, as Arno also mentioned, or should we, think about something regional, something, sub-regional? It's because it's as you mentioned, that well mentioned, on the budget, and the resources are very limited, and maybe we can avoid, to having all those, laboratories in each country, and have one, for example, in one of the countries, they can, host those, labs, and they can expand, the activities across the country. What do you think about this?
I think this is a very good approach to foster the effectiveness of the quality infrastructure and to accelerate this process. As long as every partner, as every country is able to equally access the services and to exchange also the knowledge, I would say this is a good solution. Sometimes, and this is a more political comment, it can be different to ensure these equal access, but it is possible, I think. But I'm a physicist and not a policymaker. I would really support this idea, actually, and it is under this keyword smart specialization, where, for example, one country is providing traceability for the quantity of the energy carrier. The other one is specifically looking at quality, purity, and so such things. Yeah, that's possible.
Okay, thank you very much, and hopefully we'll overcome all those political sensitivities, and even in the energy security, we have always this question of having their own infrastructure on everything, so we are independent of others, and that can be in a regional perspective can harm the progress, but also can be an opportunity to avoid those political sensitivity and go beyond this and have some regional platform. Yes, Arno, do you think about this regional perspective, how we can handle all those aspects on standards? The regulation, as you mentioned, is very important, but how to harmonize, because all the time we are telling people that we have to harmonize, but how we can harmonize, and from where we have to start, let's say.
Yes, I think the harmonization is probably a very ambitious target. I think we should start with interoperability and transparency. And so what can you do is, I think, it's participate in the processes where standards are being set, right? So participate, for example, in the ISO technical committees on hydrogen, which are now also being further developed for derivatives. So that's very important. Cooperate with your neighbors, right? See what your neighbors are doing, and see if you can learn and exchange from each other. Another thing, so this is not something that maybe the government should do, but maybe they can facilitate it, is in terms of sustainability certification. Most certifiers offer what they call pre-certification. So while you're developing your project, you can actually say, go to the certifier, and they will give you a checklist of what you need to provide. And so this allows you to already start budgeting. Okay, how is this going to cost? How much is this going to cost? What does it entail? And will my project essentially comply, right? And not build something, get the millions invested, and realize, oh, actually, this is not compatible with what my client wants. So I think that's those are processes that we recommend, and it allows to get ready and also identify knowledge gaps, right? So if you say, okay, I need to do this, but I don't know how to do it, get started and train your personnel. So I think those are part of the answer.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, we have to, follow, the recommendation of IRENA roadmap, and I think we have to go step by step. Do not bypass, all those really engaging first phases. That is, I think, very important to highlight. I was checking the chat box, some questions, but regarding the regionalization, it's excellent, idea, but the experience shows that it's very difficult to realize, as Fabian mentioned. So in particularly in North Africa, so that is, I think, one of the aspects that we have to deal with, between Nigeria and Morocco, Egypt, for example. But that should be the future from my point of view. That is, I think, not really a question, but it's a suggestion more than yeah. I think it's a very important to another question point. Sometimes the reference global QI index is misleading from a practical point of view. Arno, can you elaborate on this a little bit?
Not really. I'm not sure what the Q index is being used for. So I wouldn't know.
The index.
Yes, exactly. So I don't know what I'm not really familiar with the QI index. I don't know, Fabian, if you have an opinion.
As far as I've understood, it's a measure to rate the level of implementation of the quality infrastructure system of a country. I'm also not very familiar with that. I know that this is not traced back to the international system of units.
Yeah. So I think, JDEF showed that we have in our roadmap, we provide essentially sort of a checklist, right, of what you need to do in the different steps, which provide you more hands-on practical approach to advancing it, which is probably more important than qualifying it. But I guess it serves a similar purpose in a certain way.
Yes, I'm not sure that David is still with us or is disconnected. Otherwise, I have another question for you, Arno. The priority action, that is, I think, very important. You highlighted, those first, stages that the country have to fulfill. But the actions that should take to align those green hydrogen policies with the global standards. We have the global standards and we have the EU standards, and how to deal with this, and the timing of doing this is now the right moment or right time to deal with this, or it's maybe we have to wait a little bit until having a clear view about the regulations, about the policy that the country will issue, I think sooner or later. So that is, I think, one of the elements is the how and when we have to start dealing with those actions.
Yeah, maybe I'll try a short answer since we already did it over time. But so I think the short answer is start yesterday, right? As early as possible with QI and sustainability certification of identifying what is needed, integrate it into the process of developing your hydrogen strategy. I think most North African countries now have strategies. Some are still developing them, and do this in parallel. And see it as an opportunity for ensuring that the investments will happen, right? Because a lot of the strategies are aimed at exporting to attract investment, and of course, quality and sustainability are key enablers for making that happen. So, yes, I think we provided the framework for actions. Start as soon as possible.
Thank you, Fabian. Your last words regarding the international partnership, maybe, because you were a little bit excited on this way.
Exactly. Yeah, maybe we can close with that. Yeah, I would really recommend as early as possible to contact the international metrology community, namely BIPM or Euramet and the corresponding networks. To be really effective in that way, to get a running infrastructure, it's essential to speak with each other. This is key. And I think also my colleague Felix here with his comment, yeah, he pointed out it's not only about physics, but it's also about communication on a political level and to really spread the word on the requirements, what are actually needed to bring this transition to a success. And yeah, maybe it's very important to make clear to those decision makers that this investment in quality infrastructure, it pays off. That's very important.
Thank you very much. That's it for my side. Before closing, I would like to thank Arnaud and Fabian for their insightful presentation and also for their thoughts on regarding the question that I asked them there. So that is, I think, a very fruitful discussion we had. So over to you, Tiziana. You have something to add and for the closing remark. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa. Since we are over time and one good standard to respect is also the time, I would just like to close by saying that we still have much to say. So we hope to be able to organize more follow-on activities on the topic because there is a lot of questions that remain unanswered. So please stay tuned for the future activities of IRENA and the MedGem network, and pleased to see you in the next event. Thank you all for joining and bon appétit to everyone.